And what Pierre Genet sort of figured out was there's stuff in our body that when we don't sequence it through, when we don't complete certain actions, there's a sense where our body doesn't ever finish. So there's these little impulses, for example, like an impulse to protect your face when a bomb was exploding. He was working with like World War I veterans and sexual assault survivors. And so like if a bomb blows up and you're going to protect your face, but you couldn't get your hands up quickly enough, that body is stuck constantly trying to do this sequence of protection, but never completing.
In this video, I am talking with Patrick Weeg about EMDR and sensorimotor psychotherapy. Patrick is a clinical social worker in Denver, Colorado, where he's a faculty member of the Sensorimotor Psychotherapy Institute, a body-centered talk therapy for healing from traumatic and attachment wounds. Patrick is also on the adjunct faculty at the University of Denver's Graduate School of Social Work, and he's a co-owner of the Denver Center for Integrated Counseling, where he focuses on in-depth work with adults. Patrick will explain how we can use sensorimotor psychotherapy and somatic work in general to enhance our EMDR work. He will explain concepts such as contact statements and procedural patterns, and how to integrate this knowledge with our EMDR work to get better results with our clients. Here's the interview. Patrick Weeg, welcome to the Art and Science of EMDR, and thanks so much for being here.
Hey, Rotem, thanks for having me.
Of course. Patrick, I appreciate your time and willingness to talk about sensorimotor psychotherapy, which you teach. And I wanted to talk to you today about how we can integrate sensorimotor psychotherapy into our EMDR practice. So I know there's a lot of theory about sensorimotor psychotherapy and somatic therapy in general. And as we develop a better understanding of the nervous system and the brain and the body as a whole, we understand how important it is to use somatic work in our therapy in general and EMDR in particular. So I'm wondering if we can start by talking a little bit about the theory behind sensorimotor psychotherapy.
Yeah, so sensorimotor psychotherapy is a body-centered talking therapy that uses mindfulness as a way to study the organization of experience. And what that means is basically how we as a person, as a self in relationship and in community, like how we, the patterns of our mind and body, basically, and how those interact. You know, there's an apocryphal story. I don't remember the details. You'd have to talk to Pat Ogden, who created sensorimotor, along with many others. And but something to the effect of she was a rolfer doing body work and changing the structure of people's bodies over a series of sessions. And then what she found is that people would eventually then shift back into their old postures, their old ways of being. And the missing link that she saw, and I don't know where rolfing stands today, but 30, 40 years ago, the missing link was to include the psychology of top-down processes as well as bottom-up. So to study and reorganize how we experience a moment, how we experience relationships. So sensorimotor psychotherapy, they work along two tracks, which is too simple to say because they weave together, but in general they work a trauma track and like a developmental or non-traumatic relational sort of wounds. So you mentioned the top down and bottom up processing. I'm wondering if you can say a few words about that. So top down processing is when you sort of think your way through something. So for example, if I thought, if I went to work out this morning and I thought, I don't want to work out. And then I said to myself something like, yeah, Patrick, but you like really love the results of when you work out. So you've said this before, let's go. workout.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like I talk myself through it. It's verbal. It's often using like logic, rational thinking. I want to get results, so I'm going to go work out. That's a perfectly good way to get me to work out. Bottom-up processing is more literally coming from the bottom, meaning the rest of your body up towards your brain. And it's things like where you're checking in to how you feel in your body and using that to inform more of an emergent process. So it's like studying what happens. Like when I woke up, I was like, ooh, I'm sore yesterday, or sore this morning when I woke up. And I'm feeling that soreness that actually is the beginning of my back hurting. Mm-hmm. And when I feel that in my back, that's like a bottom-up thing. I register that in my head, and I start to create a feedback loop. My head goes, oh, I've been here before. You know, when you work out with a back that's hurt like this, you might be out of commission for 2 weeks. Then I check back in with my back, and I feel it down below. And it's like, oh, yeah, don't work out is what my body's saying. Not because I'm lazy, but because I'm going to push through and get hurt.
Mm-hmm. So that's a message that your body sends you from the bottom up.
Yeah, and we interpret it, right? We make meaning, but the sensations in the bottom up are a particular ache in my back that feels not muscular. It feels like other stuff's getting messed up.
Yeah.
So a lot of us don't actually have that feedback loop, you know, or it's not that well trained. So we're ignoring those sorts of feedback loops all the time.
Mm-hmm. So in sensorimotor psychotherapy, we would develop more of this awareness, right?
Totally. An awareness or an increased sensitivity to what is my body and emotions, which Damasio, I think, says are really based in the body. So it's like feeling emotions in the body as well as sensations to inform how I want to operate.
Yeah, well, that kind of naturally brings me to a quote that I wanted to read for you and ask your opinion. So Ariel Schwartz published a new book, the Complex PTSD Treatment Manual, and one of the things she writes there is that without interventions that incorporate somatic awareness and movement, many therapeutic approaches are limited in their ability to help clients fully release the impact of traumatic events. So I wanted to ask, I assume you would agree with that statement, but I wanted to ask, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of, you know, Pat Ogden, I'm pretty sure about this, did her dissertation with a group of people who really were translating and working with Pierre Genet's model from the 1800s, beginning of the 1900s. And what Pierre Genet sort of figured out was there's stuff in our body that when we don't sequence it through, when we don't complete certain actions, there's a sense where our body doesn't ever finish. So there's these little impulses, for example, like an impulse to protect your face when a bomb was exploding. He was working with like World War I veterans and sexual assault survivors. And so like if a bomb blows up and you're going to protect your face, but you couldn't get your hands up quickly enough, that body is stuck constantly trying to do this sequence of protection, but never completing it. And so the theory was if you start to move these things through the body and complete those actions in a certain state, so you have to kind of pull up the files to work with them. If you could evoke that state, if you could elicit that state and then work with it, you could get to resolution in a way that people weren't finding on their own.
Yeah.
So absolutely, that's touching into a different piece of the experience than just talking about when the bomb blew up and what you thought and how you know, made sense of it.
Yeah. So when you do that, when, you know, if you're exposed to a bomb or a war situation, is that what's called procedural learning, that you do that unconsciously to kind of keep protecting yourself from a danger that is not present anymore?
Yeah. Yeah, I think about procedural learning. I don't know if this is true, but I think about it as two ways. Like either something really big happened, like, you know, too fast, too soon, too young, that sort of stuff. So it's like really impactful, Or maybe it wasn't super impactful, but it happened over and over and over and over. So you adjusted in your body to it.
Yeah.
So for example, my dad had, I don't know, somewhere between 3 and 5 bicycle accidents. His systems, when he starts to get near a street on a bike, you can watch as his musculature changes. And his body is preparing for something. Every time he's on a bike near a street or hears a car, there's like a response already starting.
Yeah.
That's one kind of procedural learning, is like kind of the more trauma stuff. Then the more like everyday things that shapes our bodies by our relationships would be like, you know, if you grow up in a family or in a body that you're told is too big, then you might do something to make yourself smaller. So if you're told like a big body is threatening or not okay, then you get that impression verbally or non-verbally by your family, your peers, and you start to do stuff to shrink yourself. And then you're not even thinking about that and walking around the world with your head about an inch or two shorter than if you fully lengthened your spine.
Yeah, our procedural patterns more pronounced when they happen in the non-verbal phase, so in the first 2 or 3 years of development, of early development?
I don't have any research to back this up, but I was told once that, you know, if you look at babies, they have fantastic posture. I haven't done that study. I don't know if that's true, but it sounds good. I have a little girl, and she had, I think, fantastic posture.
Right.
And then the theory is that in time, as you have repetitions that sort of train your body about how to bring your body and its internal needs into harmony with this imperfect, possibly threatening, possibly safe family, society, culture, world, environment, that you have to adapt and change. And so certainly it would seem that early on, especially those right brain structures, this is Alan Shore's work, last trimester to first 18 months, that right brain stuff, which is where a lot of the body stuff is connected to, is really impacted.
Yeah. Patrick, how do these procedural patterns of the body affect our relationships later in life?
This is what I'm most interested in. So
okay, I'm ready to hear about it.
Yeah, I'm most interested in connection with other people. I always have been since I was a little kid. I'll talk about my mom issues in another episode. But for this, it's like I'm super interested in connection. And connection is body to body first. And what I mean by that is you don't have to touch another body, but we are feeling and reading other people's bodies through the process of mirror neurons, through our own histories of bodies. We're making shit up based on our body's history, your body. And then we're relating to each other. And like so much is happening so quickly. If you pause it, so much happens in like a second. You can't even believe it. So what I found is to be in states where you really feel good, to play with other people, to have intimacy with other people, to share grief or pain with other people. That's like a body-to-body experience. And what I'm super interested in is all the ways that that gets interrupted, blocked, or enhanced.
Yeah, so I'm curious now. I want to transition, talk about EMDR a little bit, and how can we use this knowledge and incorporate it? You know, what we talked about, procedural learning, the mirror neurons, to read the other person's body patterns. How can we incorporate this knowledge into our EMDR work?
The amazing thing I think EMDR is doing is that they are working with procedural learning and some of these deeper implicit memories and belief systems and somatic states. So I think in terms of integrating what we know from sensorimotor with EMDR, it's even just naming some of what you're already doing, which is to change some of the ways that our body is regulating. And so in EMDR, I think what I would be thinking about is both in the resourcing and the processing phases. I'd be thinking about two things. Like in the resourcing, I would really be thinking, how do we deepen this in the body so that people walk away with a felt sense of their body being different. And in sensorimotor psychotherapy, they do that in a similar way as the resourcing in EMDR, where you're trying to like deepen that state by exploring through like a aware, mindful sort of moment, your thoughts, the images, the feeling, the like taste, touch, and smell of, say, you know, being up at a high mountain lake or a container or a safe space. Or when you're doing that, you're like deepening and training your body and brain to go into this state. And the more you go into that, the easier it'll be to access.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the other flip side, I think, is the processing, which is when you're processing then to bring that into the body. And, you know, you need a somatic, you know, Bessel van der Kolk says you need EMDR, IFS, and some sort of somatic work. Who knows what he's saying these years, but that was a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
So like, you know, I think he's into structures right now. Anyway, sidebar. So what I think, so what that means is like, you probably do need some sort of somatic training then to integrate with EMDR to help you sequence things in the body, and also to like really learn how to link the body when it shows up in EMDR session. My best friend does this with EMDR, brain spotting, sensorimotor, of like dropping for a moment into the body as something comes up in an EMDR session, working that piece and then coming back into the process, the sequencing in the EMDR protocol.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think that, you know, in EMDR, when we process a target, we have the image, the negative cognition, the emotion, and the body. And I think a lot of times we miss something. We kind of, you know, just ask the client, or many of us, many EMDR therapists ask, what do you notice in your body? And then just notice that. And I think we're missing something. I think that a lot of us, a lot of therapists and clients stay in our left brain, and we're missing the more implicit, right? The more implicit memories and the where really trauma and deep memories are stored in the body. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and it brings up this great sort of point, which is, again, there's always exceptions to everything I say, so don't take it as a rule. But in general, when you ask a question, people are going to go left. They're going to go into their left brain, into the logical, rational, sort of like thinking part of their brain. So if I say, what'd you eat for lunch? You're going to have to like recall and think about that. So if you ask somebody, what do you notice in your body? Some people will be able to do that. Some will not. And what I find often is that then, so how do we work around that? And the move that I'm most interested in is called contact statements, which comes from Pat Ogden and Ron Kurtz before her and Virginia Satir. Anyway, contact statements are how you start to notice what's happening for your client in their body, and you name it. They might not notice it. And so you look, you see their body, and you go, oh, your chest opens up, huh? Or like, oh, as you see that image that comes up while we were doing processing, like your shoulders drop. And it's like when you make those little statements, what happens is people become aware, and often that element will deepen. Like I just watched you do it. I said, your chest opens. And it's like your chest opened a little, Roten.
Right.
And I said, your shoulders drop. And you're like, oh yeah. So it like deepens the things that are unfolding.
Yeah. I know that in consultations I've done with you in the past, the reflection. So that what you said, what you described as contact statements sounds a little bit like reflections, right? But I know that the work in sensorimotor psychotherapy and what we did in consultations was also more physiological mirroring. So you just mirror the other person by just kind of somatically reflecting.
Yeah. So I might literally do like the movements you're making to bring some attention to them. Also, then I get a chance, and you as a therapist, if therapists are listening, you get the chance to like feel into your body. What does this movement feel like?
Mm-hmm.
Which will give you a deeper felt sense that you can then reflect to the client.
Yeah.
So there's that element. Also, what I would say, this is another thing for EMDR therapists, is when you're in contact with yourself, you'll notice your body in all sorts of states when you're with clients. And
Yeah.
if we say that we're in a feedback loop, body to body, right brain to right brain all the time, you'll be feeling what your clients are feeling in these states.
Right.
So my suggestion to you would be to move,
Mm-hmm.
to like have your body move some of this through. Pay attention to what's going on in your body, what you want to do, what you don't want to do.
Yeah.
And break up that learning, break up your own procedural learning.
Yeah. What are your thoughts about just like in a therapy session or an active EMDR processing to just stand up, like not just move like that in your chair, but stand up and get some movement?
Yeah, I think it's great. I'm all about it. Many of my sessions, we end up on our feet. What I will say is for many people, though, that is too vulnerable too quickly. It's like a weird phenomenon in therapy where we're trained to sort of sit. So if you invite people to stand, they'll often be like, "Ew, that's weird. What are you doing?"
Yeah.
So if they're not somebody who's up for standing right away, which you'll know, by the way, if you're tracking them and in contact physically, emotionally, then you can do smaller versions of that. Like you can just notice their spine lengthening a little and bring their attention to it. Like, oh, did you notice when you were talking about your kid, how like your spine lengthened?
Yeah.
You want to like feel that a little? And if they say yes, you go, what else do you notice in your body as you lengthen that spine?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, Patrick, that is really, really good information. I want to ask you one more question before we say goodbye. And this is something I ask every single person I interview. And the question is, how do we get better? How do EMDR therapists get better at what we do?
Yeah, I'm gonna have a very boring answer. It is you keep learning and you do it in a disciplined way. And the discipline for me, the discipline for me involves like several elements. It is a personal experience of being in therapy. I find that deeply moving.
That's not boring. I think that's one of the best answers. And I think that when you do your own, whatever therapy you're trying to really deepen your knowledge in, when you're doing this therapy as a client, you learn a lot more than you can learn from any kind of books, videos, and even trainings and consultations, because you really experience it on a deeper level.
Yeah, completely. So that is one. Another is I pay for consultation, and I pay I think fair price for it. Like, and I would do that. I highly recommend it. I meet once a month at least, and then I have a consultation group. So I'm running cases by people all the time. And then within that, I would say one of the things I've learned from a mentor of mine, Alex Katahakis at the Center for Healthy Sex in LA, is that so much of our work is expanding our capacity to be with our clients' states, which will be regulating the deeper dysregulation our clients come into session with. What that largely means is most of us will have an impulse to do something when our clients are in these deep states, often of pain. We will want to move in and rescue them. We will want to distance, dissociate, repress. Something will happen. So I think much of our work is to learn, how do you hang in there in those moments with your client without fixing it and without disengaging.
Yeah, that was not boring at all, Patrick. That was a really good answer. I want to thank you for your time. That was very, very helpful. I'm sure that EMDR therapists will learn a lot from this information from you. And thank you for your time.
Absolutely. The last thing I'd say is just that if people want more information, they should just Google Sensorimotor Psychotherapy, go to their website. They have training, books, all that stuff. Many of the people are EMDR trained or faculty as well, overlapping. So.
Yeah, and I will link below to, all the, good resources about sensorimotor psychotherapy and integration with EMDR therapy.
Great.
Thank you, Patrick.
Hey, thank you, Rotem.